David, let me just ask you before we go, because just your perspective on what's going on with the Kurds, particularly
Oh yeah.
in the Syrian conflict. I mean,
Syria.
just a couple of minutes, if you wouldn't mind, because it is the least, I think, talked about aspect of this conflict, and
And it's amazing because it's like should be considered one of the most important events in recent world history.
yeah, tell us why you say that.
Well, I mean, this is the first time since the 30s, really, since 30s Spain, that a group of people who are trying to create democracy without a state have actually been in control of a significant amount of territory. You say the Zapatistas to some degree, but their control was always mixed. I mean, this is 2/5 of Syria is now under what they call the Democratic Confederation of North Syria, which is essentially organizing on anarchist principles. It's not explicitly anarchist, but they're to a large degree inspired by the work of Murray Bookchin, who is a American anarchist from New York, actually, and their ideas of democratic confederalism. We're going to create bottom-up direct democracy, and they've been working very hard on creating models of how you would run a complex modern society without a top-down government bureaucracy. And the other really interesting thing is the feminist content. I mean, people there told me repeatedly, they said, look, we're anti-capitalist, but one thing we think we've learned from the 20th century is that you can't get rid of capitalism without getting rid of the state, and you can't get rid of the state without getting rid of patriarchy. But ultimately, patriarchy underpins all forms of power. So, okay, how do you get rid of patriarchy? Well, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be a long path, but giving all women access to automatic weapons is a first step, and that's why they have the women's army.
And so, all right, so you've just come back from Syria. Tell me what that looks like. I mean, what does the absence of the patriarchy, what does the absence of a state in terms of democracy, what does it look like? I mean, how many people are we talking about? What kind of
About 2 million.
and how sophisticated is the services, and what, I mean, how does it
I
work?
mean, it's a rural area. This was a province. So we're not talking about a place with like a complex banking system to nationalize or anything like that. So they're starting with something fairly simple. But nonetheless, they're trying to create industry from the bottom up. They have some oil. They have a lot of wheat and but they didn't have refineries or mills, so they had to build all that stuff. But people have cars. Actually, it's quite interesting. One thing I've been looking into is how what they do with cars because people don't have driver's license. License plates are optional. There's no real speed limit, and they don't have any of that bureaucracy. They do have traffic cops in the cities, but they're basically there to pull kids out of cars. Like you're 12, get off that motorcycle. You're 8, you can't drive a car. Cut that out. But aside from that, people just manage it themselves, and accidents are a problem, but not any worse than anywhere else. Um, so they're trying to proceed without that kind of bureaucratic structure. But the women's stuff is really interesting. So every position they have, any formal position, there's always two people, one male and one female. So and it's considered good for two reasons. First of all, gender balance has to be strict, 50-50 and everything. But also so nobody ever makes a decision on their own. There has to be at least two people conferring on anything. So no one's ever in charge of dictating anything. At the same time, they have these councils that sort of send delegates to higher councils or send delegates to higher councils, not representatives, delegates. We're just communicating the decisions from below. And those councils have to have a certain women's quorum. I think you need 40% women to make a decision. But they also have an all-women's council, which always exists to balance them and can veto any decision that they make that might adversely affect women, which, obviously any decision can affect women. So the way it works, they have these local communes, assemblies, and those assemblies will have groups. They'll have one group that looks at health and one group that looks at security and one group that is interested in education, so forth and so forth, culture, whatever it might be. And each one of those has a women's group to balance it. And each one of them sends delegates to, the neighborhood, the city, and so forth.
How long has this structure been in place? And
5 years now. Yeah.
And what is happening in terms of the that 2/5 of territory that they're holding in Syria? Is that
Well, it used to be
stable?
one. They're doing better now. I mean, basically, these are the guys who took out ISIS. They have
Right.
they have the FAJ, which is the People's Defense Forces, and then they have the Women's Defense Forces. In addition to that, and they, obviously, as you might imagine, the Islamists hate these guys. They're the ultimate enemy, especially because a lot of the women are sort of reviving paganism and saying we're fighting in the name of our goddess Ishtar. This kind of thing. You can imagine what the Islamists think of these guys. It's like as bad as it can possibly get. But so they attacked them, and of course Turkey is trying to destroy this. The
Right.
Turkish government, which is right wing, and like they're fighting the PKK, which is a Kurdish move, also a Kurdish left wing movement, is very related to this ideologically. They also believe in direct democracy and women's rights. All of this is anathema to the right wing Turkish government, which is recently invaded a part of Rojava, at first they used ISIS as proxy, and I mean I can say this. Basically ISIS was supported by Turkey. If nothing else, they were trading with them, secretly working with them. I met one woman who she was captured by ISIS, tortured, interrogated, and then they turned her over to Turkish intelligence.
Mm.
I mean, they work together. So at first, Turkey was essentially using ISIS as a proxy to fight these guys, and these guys won. I mean, ISIS is now reduced to a tiny pocket. So that's why Rojava got so much bigger. And now it's like half Arab. It started as Kurdish, but a lot of the Arabs, communities are really into this thing. People would say, we liberate an Arab town. And usually, what happens is everybody says, "Wow, this is great. We love this bottom-up democracy thing." I don't know about the women's rights stuff so
Right.
much. But gradually they come around. They talk to the women. They say if you get the women more involved in economic production, that becomes a base for them to become more politically active, and gradually things start moving that way. So that's been happening. But Turkey now, finally they just gave up and said, "Fine, we're just going to invade," and they did. What they did is there's one part of Rojava which was isolated from the rest. And the Turkish army simply invaded. There was no pretext. They just came in using, German tanks and British and American planes, and overwhelming military superiority against a bunch of guys armed with AK-47. So there wasn't much they could do. Finally, the FAJ just pulled out because they realized, we could fight street for the city and we could kill thousands of Turks, but thousands of civilians would die in the process. So they actually made an ethical decision just not to do it and pull out. But the amazing thing is this is like just totally unprovoked aggression on civilians with people who said they were going to commit war crimes. I mean, Erdogan announced in advance, "Oh, this place isn't really Kurdish," and this place is 95% Kurdish, right? It's really just 40% Kurdish, and they came later. We're going to restore it to its real Arab population. So basically, he announced that he was going to do ethnic cleansing. And you'd think that if somebody launches an unprovoked invasion of another country announcing you're going to commit war crimes, that there might be a little bit of a hue and cry and people might get upset. Instead, like Germany, Britain, Britain was even supportive of this. Nobody raised any significant objections. If maybe they just muttered a little bit. Often they didn't even do that, even though they were using their weapons to commit war crimes. And the only conclusion I could reach is the British government, the German government, which were the most strongly behind this, or supplying them weapons and renewing their contracts to supply weapons to the Turkish army as it was committing these war crimes, are both conservative governments threatened on their right by even more anti-immigrant populists. You got UKIP here in America. We all know what's going on in Germany. You have these kind of crazy anti-immigrant right-wing parties. So I actually think that the ethnic cleansing and the atrocities going on in Afrin are actually could be said to be the first atrocities, acts of genocide even. Some genocidal acts are not totally exterminating them, but they're definitely ethnically cleansing them. They're committing crimes like crazy, driving people from their homes. And because Erdogan said, and he did announce this, Erdogan being president of Turkey, he said, after we drive these guys out, we're going to take the refugees and put them there.
Wow.
So they're relocating all the scariest ones, the families of the ISIS guys, the families of various jihadis, people like that, in the homes of the Kurds that they just drove out. And that's why Europe's letting them get away with it. They're saying, yeah, like, take the immigrants and put them there.
Because this is going to basically, they want to turn it into a big refugee internment camp, essentially, a refugee camp.
Yeah, and that way they won't come to Europe. So Europe which is already paying Turkey directly to resettle the refugees and also supplying them with weapons, is saying, yeah, okay, do what you need to do.
Is there a resource where people have, wanted to find out? I mean, people can read online. There's a story, I guess, in New York Review of Books, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. But are there any other?
I think the best news source is called theregion.org.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
It's called theregion.org.
Theregion.org.
That's the one I would plug. Yeah, it's largely Kurdish writers, but others as well. It's a sort of a left-wing perspective on events in the Middle East, but not from a strictly sort of classic anti-imperialist. I mean, I'm an anti-imperialist, obviously, but the word anti-imperialist has become a code word for we're for anybody that the U.S. seems to be against.
Right.
So, like a lot of the left-wingers that you'll see, like, well, they're attacking Assad. I'm for Assad. I don't care if he's a fascist who murders and rapes and tortures people. Yeah.
And is there any other like major reporting or document? Is there a documentary that people can see about?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of really good videos especially on the feminist movement, the women, the fighters. I mean, I can't remember any titles offhand, but Google it. You'll find lots of good stuff.
All right, will do. David Graeber, thank you so much for all this time today. I really appreciate it, and a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, there it is. I know it's a quickie, folks, but interesting stuff that you just don't hear really anywhere.